What do you do when the person you gave everything to turns you into a joke? You thought your marriage was a partnership, that taking care of each other was natural. But then, one night, you overhear them laughing, mocking your kindness, your efforts, as if you were nothing more than a convenience. Something inside you shifts. You could fight, argue, demand respect, but instead, you choose something far more powerful. Silence. No words, no threats, no outbursts, just a quiet, undeniable change. And now, the real question is, who will break first? Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If it's your first time here, don't forget to subscribe and like this video, as every like truly inspires me. Now, let's get started. I used to think that a relationship was built on balance. We both worked hard, and to me, it made sense that sharing responsibilities at home was just part of the deal. Helping out wasn't something to resent. It was just what you did when you cared about someone. So when she invited some friends over, I decided to give them space. I didn't want to get in the way of their time together. I was finishing up the last of the dishes when I heard laughter coming from the living room. Their voices were loud and carried clearly through the house. I wasn't trying to listen, but when I heard my name, I couldn't help but pause. He's only good for cooking and cleaning. It was her voice. My wife. For a second I thought I had misheard, but then there was a burst of laughter. It wasn't just her, everyone joined in, laughing like she'd said the funniest thing ever. "You're so lucky," one of her friends said, still laughing. "I wish my husband would just shut up and do the housework without complaining about everything." My wife joined in. If I let him, he'd probably spend the whole day in the kitchen. The jokes kept coming. One friend after another added their own twist, turning me into the butt of their jokes. I stood there frozen, dish towel in hand, realizing that the woman I had given so much of myself to had reduced me to a mere servant in her eyes. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. There was no warmth in her voice, no trace of gratitude, only mockery. It felt like I was being ridiculed for caring, for trying, like I was worth less because I made sure she always came home to a clean house and a hot meal. I could have confronted her right then. I could have marched into the living room, demanded to know why she felt the need to humiliate me in front of her friends. But I didn't. I stood there in silence, staring at the bubbles in the soapy water. A cold realization settled over me. Maybe it was the understanding that I wasn't her partner in her eyes. Maybe I had been giving everything to someone who didn't see or appreciate me. I don't know how long I stood there, letting the laughter echo through the house, but eventually, it quieted down. I set the dish towel on the counter and walked away. I couldn't bring myself to look at her, not after hearing what I had just heard. I didn't want to see the smirk on her face, the way she'd bask in the laughter of her friends, relishing the idea of me as a joke. So, I went to bed. As I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, I didn't feel anger. I expected to be furious, maybe even seething, but instead, I felt something else, something colder. Clarity. For years, I had tried to be the best husband I could be. I never thought of it as sacrifice because I truly believed we were a team, but now I saw things differently. She didn't see me as a partner. To her, I was just a convenience, a tool to be used when needed and discarded when not. And that night, something inside me shifted. I didn't shout, I didn't start a fight. I didn't let on that I had heard a thing. But from that moment on, I knew things between us could never be the same. The next morning, I woke up before her, as I usually did. I lay in bed for a few moments, letting the silence hang in the air. Normally, I would get up, make coffee, and prepare breakfast so she could wake to the smell of fresh food. But not today. Instead, I got up, took a shower, got dressed, and left the house without saying a word. There was no dramatic slam of the door, no passive-aggressive speech about how hurt I was. I simply left. I didn't check to see if she was awake, didn't ask if she needed anything. I didn't care. For the first time in a long while, I was focused entirely on myself. On the way to work, I stopped at a coffee shop, something I hadn't done in years. I sat there longer than I needed to, relishing the quiet, the absence of anyone expecting something from me. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the minutes pass without the pressure to be anywhere or do anything. I used to rush home after work, eager to make sure she had everything she needed before she even had to ask. But today, I didn't text her. I didn't check in. I didn't respond to her usual, "What's for dinner?" message. I just worked at my own pace, taking my time. And when the day ended, I didn't head straight home. Instead, I went to the gym. It had been so long since I did something just for myself. I used to work out regularly, but it had faded as I focused on taking care of everything else at home. But as I lifted weights, feeling my muscles strain with each rep, I realized how much of myself I had lost in the process. When I finally got home, it was well past dinner time. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Where were you?" she asked, barely looking up. I shrugged and kicked off my shoes. "Out." She raised an eyebrow, her eyes narrowing. "Out where?" "Just out." The question hung there in the air, but I didn't care enough to answer. "I hope you managed to get yourself something for dinner because I still haven't eaten." I looked at her, really taking her in. She didn't seem angry, just patient, like she expected me to have everything figured out by now. Without saying anything, I walked past her and headed straight for the bedroom. "There's food in the fridge." That was the first sign of cracks in her calm demeanor. She didn't reply right away, likely hoping I'd change my mind and bring something for her. But I didn't. Instead, I made my way to the shower and took my time. When I finally came out, she was still sitting there, arms tightly folded across her chest. "You didn't cook?" she asked. "No," I answered plainly. She let out a sharp scoff. "So what? You want me to cook now?" I grabbed a bottle of water from the counter and casually leaned against it. She stared at me, her expression shifting. First, she thought I was joking. Then, she wondered if I was trying to make some kind of statement. But I wasn't. I was just over it. She didn't say anything else that night. She ordered takeout, ate it in silence, and I went to bed without a word. The next day, I did the same thing. And the day after that. No breakfast made, no lunch packed, no dinner waiting for her when she got home. I still cleaned up after myself, my side of the bed, any dishes I used, but I stopped cleaning up after her. Laundry began to pile up, dishes stayed in the sink longer than usual. The house wasn't filthy, but it was definitely starting to show. She tried to act unaffected, but I could tell from the way her eyes darted to the kitchen when she entered, or the way her brows furrowed when she noticed the trash hadn't been taken out yet. But she didn't say anything. Not yet. At first, she acted like it didn't bother her. I could see it in the way she ignored the growing mess around her, scrolling through her phone while sitting next to a pile of laundry, walking past the overflowing trash without acknowledging it. She thought this was some kind of game, that I was just being childish to make a point, but I wasn't playing. The first week passed, and she stuck to her routine. Takeout every night, dirty dishes piling up, her clothes scattered around the house as usual, expecting them to vanish on their own. But magic had already left the building. By the second week, things started to deteriorate. The takeout bags began to pile up. The sink overflowed. Toothpaste stains marred the bathroom mirror. The laundry basket couldn't hold any more clothes. And since I was only washing my own, she was left with a shrinking wardrobe of clean clothes. One morning, I found her standing in front of the closet, sighing as she rifled through the mess. "Did you do the laundry?" she asked, not even looking at me. "For myself, yeah," I said, pulling a shirt from my neatly folded pile. She scoffed. "Really?" I shrugged. "I don't mind washing my own clothes." Her jaw clenched. I could tell she wanted to argue, wanted to accuse me of being petty, but she swallowed it. Instead, she grabbed a wrinkled shirt from the back of the closet and stormed off. That evening, she tried something new. I was sitting on the couch, watching something on my phone, when I heard her clanging around in the kitchen. She wasn't exactly the cooking type, barely knew her way around a stove. But there she was, standing at the stove, a frustrated look on her face as she scrolled through a recipe. A few minutes later, I could smell something burning. She muttered curses under her breath, yanked the pan off the heat, and waved a towel to clear the smoke. I didn't move. I didn't offer to help. I just watched. She turned toward me, expecting a reaction. I took a slow sip of my drink. "You could help, you know," she snapped. "I could," I replied flatly. Her eyes narrowed. "So now you're just refusing to cook?" I raised an eyebrow. I thought I was only good for cooking and cleaning. That shut her up. For the first time in all of this, I saw something flicker in her eyes, maybe recognition, maybe even guilt. But it was brief. She huffed and turned back to the stove, trying to salvage the mess she'd made. I didn't move. By the third week, the house was complete chaos. She was wearing clothes from the bottom of the hamper. The kitchen looked like a war zone, with half-finished meals and burnt pots scattered everywhere. She had to dig through drawers to find a clean fork. I still didn't say anything. She adjusted her approach, opting for subtle jabs instead. One evening, as she swept crumbs from the table, she muttered, "This place is disgusting." I glanced at her, not lifting my gaze from my phone, and simply replied, "Yeah, it is." She paused, clearly waiting for some kind of response. But I gave her nothing. "Are you seriously okay living like this?" she asked, crossing her arms defensively. I shrugged, barely looking at her. "I take care of my things," I answered. Her frustration was evident in the tightness of her lips. "This is ridiculous." I didn't even flinch. "Then clean it," I said, still engrossed in my phone. She had no rebuttal. By the fourth week, the air between us had shifted. What had begun as tension had now morphed into full-blown irritation. One night, I returned home to find her in the kitchen, standing with her arms folded and staring at the disarray as though it had personally wronged her. "This isn't normal," she declared. I raised an eyebrow. "What isn't?" I asked. "This, your refusal to do anything," she shot back. I leaned casually against the counter, watching her. "Refusal? I'm just not doing everything for you anymore," I said. Her gaze locked with mine, and in that moment, I saw it, the realization creeping across her face. She hadn't truly understood what I'd been doing until it stopped. She had mocked me, belittled me, made me feel inadequate for managing the household. Now, as I stood amidst the disorder she had come to accept, I felt no need to fix it. The house had transformed into a battleground, though not in the traditional sense. There were no loud arguments or slamming doors, but rather a silent war of avoidance, neglect, and the shifting of responsibilities I no longer carried. She was unraveling, slowly but surely. I could tell by the way she hesitated when passing by the mess, no longer able to brush it off like she once did. I noticed it when she opened the fridge, realizing there was no prepared meal waiting for her, and when she checked her phone more often, perhaps hoping I would remind her of the tasks I used to handle. But I wasn't her fallback anymore. She tried to act unaffected, but I could tell it bothered her. By the end of the month, her frustration was impossible to hide. I had been out more often, taking longer routes home, enjoying the freedom of not being tethered to her or the house. I went out with coworkers, stayed at the gym longer, simply because I could. One evening, I returned later than usual, and there she was, sitting at the kitchen table, arms crossed, tapping her foot with impatience. The dim hum of the kitchen light cast shadows over the chaos that now filled every surface. She had been waiting for me. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice sharper than it had been in weeks. I shrugged as I set my keys down, never looking up. "Out," I replied. Her jaw tightened. "Out where?" she demanded. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and took a slow sip before responding, "Just out." She scoffed, pushing away from the table in frustration. "You're really going to act like this?" "Like what?" I asked, still leaning against the counter unfazed. "Like you don't care." I studied her. She was different. Her eyes were tired, her hair messy, and the dark circles beneath her eyes stood out in contrast to her otherwise disheveled appearance. She was still in her work clothes, but they were wrinkled, suggesting she hadn't bothered to change. For the first time in ages, she looked drained. And in that moment, I knew. She finally understood. This wasn't about getting back at her. This was her coming to terms with everything I'd been doing, the way I'd kept things running smoothly, the way I'd been the one holding everything together. All this time, she'd belittled me, made me feel small for managing the cooking, cleaning, and upkeep of our lives. But now that I'd stopped, she was falling apart. She exhaled sharply, standing up with a resigned sigh. "Fine," she muttered. "I'll just do everything myself then." I didn't stop her. I watched as she stormed to the sink, cranking the water on with unnecessary force. She scrubbed the dishes violently, muttering under her breath. I could have stepped in, taken the towel from her, and finished the task like I used to, but I didn't. She wasn't entitled to my help anymore. The following morning, she took a different tack. This time, she tried to play the victim. "I don't understand what's happening to us," she said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "We used to be a team." I glanced at her without a word. "Did we?" I asked, my tone cool. She frowned, her voice laced with confusion. "Of course we did." I shook my head as I stood up, letting out a quiet breath. "No, I was the team. You were just a spectator." That stopped her. She looked down at her hands, nervously picking at her nails. For the first time, she had no sharp retort. I wasn't playing along. No sarcasm, no exasperated sigh, no sharp retort. Just quiet. But that moment of hesitation had come and gone. For years, I had been the glue holding everything together, the one making sure our lives functioned smoothly. And what had I gotten in return? Dismissal. Ridicule. She had laughed at my efforts, mocked my concerns. Now, for the first time, she was facing the weight of it all alone. And I had no intention of stepping in to save her. She was unraveling. The minor cracks that had once been easy to ignore had widened into irreparable fractures, and no amount of pretending could disguise the collapse. The house was a wreck. Piles of takeout containers had replaced the home-cooked meals I used to prepare. The small, unseen tasks that I had quietly handled had now become glaring voids in her daily routine. And for once, I wasn't swooping in to fix it. Over the next few days, she cycled through different tactics. At first, she pretended I didn't exist, convinced that silence would wear me down. When that failed, she resorted to sarcasm, rolling her eyes dramatically every time she was forced to do something as basic as washing a dish or taking out the trash. When neither approach broke me, she tried sweetness, making vague comments about how we could go back to how things used to be, how we didn't have to let it get to this point. But I didn't budge. Then came the moment everything shifted. It was a Friday night when I delivered the final blow. I was packing a bag, methodically folding clothes with no particular urgency, as she stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching my every move. "Where are you going?" Her tone was clipped, colder than usual. "Away for the weekend," I answered without looking up. She stiffened. "Away? What does that mean?" I zipped the bag closed and finally met her eyes. "It means I'm leaving for a few days." Her arms dropped to her sides. "You're just... leaving?" I nodded. "Yeah." Her expression shifted, confusion flickering beneath the surface. "Without telling me?" "I'm telling you now." Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She was struggling to process it, searching for a way to twist the situation into something she could control. But there was nothing left to grasp. I wasn't angry, wasn't pleading. I was simply done. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice rising. "You're acting like a child, throwing a fit." A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "You think this is a tantrum?" She threw her hands up in frustration. "Yes, you're walking away like none of this ever mattered. Like everything we built means nothing." I glanced around the room, the unmade bed I had once straightened every morning, the overflowing laundry basket she hadn't touched, the empty nightstand where I used to leave small tokens of affection, just because. "Everything we built?" I repeated slowly. I took another sweeping look around. This hadn't been a partnership. She had ruled over this space, and I had been the one keeping it from crumbling. The second I stopped, it all fell apart. I slung the bag over my shoulder. "I'll be back Sunday," I said as I moved toward the door. She stepped in front of me. "This is ridiculous." I didn't respond. "You're not even going to tell me where you're going?" "Nope." Her jaw tightened, nostrils flaring. This wasn't about me leaving. It was about the fact that she no longer had control over me. For the first time in years, I had reclaimed my autonomy, and she had no idea how to handle it. "Are you seriously just going to walk out?" she asked, her voice softer now. I met her gaze one last time. "Yeah." And then I left. No explanations, no justifications, no apologies. I walked out, leaving her to sit in the mess she had created. I had expected to feel something, guilt, hesitation, a tug of responsibility. But there was nothing. No shame, no regret, just quiet, just space, just freedom. I drove with no clear destination, guided only by the need to be anywhere but there. Eventually, I found myself at a modest motel near the coast. I checked in without a second thought, and, for the next 2 days, I did something I hadn't allowed myself in years. I lived for me. I ate when I felt like it, slept when I wanted, sat by the water, watching the waves roll in, unburdened by expectations or obligations. No responsibilities, no demands, no one needing anything from me. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt good. By the time I pulled into the driveway on Sunday night, reality came rushing back. The weekend had been an escape, a brief departure from the life I had been entrenched in for so long. But as I stepped through the door, something felt different. She was there, seated at the dining table, waiting. The house remained untouched, exactly as I had left it, cluttered, chaotic, neglected. The garbage overflowed, dishes towered in the sink, and the air carried the stale scent of abandoned responsibility. She hadn't lifted a finger. No effort had been made to set things right, no attempt to change anything. She had simply waited, knowing that eventually I would return to put everything back in order. "Did you have a good time?" she asked, her voice devoid of warmth. I set my bag down. "Yeah, I did." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "Must be nice," she muttered. "Walking away from everything." My eyes drifted across the room, taking in the evidence of her indifference. The mess wasn't just physical, it was a reflection of everything between us, of what we had become. I met her gaze and nodded. Yeah, it was. For the first time, I saw something shift in her expression. The realization settled in. This wasn't a lesson, a game, or a test of patience. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't hoping for change. I was done. Her posture stiffened. "Okay," she murmured, her throat tightening around the word. A pause stretched between us before she spoke again, her voice edged with irritation. "So what now? You've made your point. Can we drop this and go back to normal?" I inhaled deeply, letting the weight of the moment settle, then stepped toward the table. From my bag, I pulled out an envelope and slid it across to her, letting it land softly in front of her. Her eyes flickered with confusion as she stared at it. "What is this?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Divorce papers," I answered, steady and calm. She didn't move, didn't react, just sat there, staring at the envelope as though it contained a language she couldn't decipher. When she finally looked up, her face was unreadable, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're serious?" I met her gaze. "Yeah." Her jaw tightened, anger rising in the wake of disbelief. "You're throwing everything away over some stupid argument?" A quiet chuckle escaped me, humorless and exhausted. "This isn't about an argument," I said. "It's about the fact that we don't exist anymore." She scoffed, running a hand through her hair. "This is ridiculous. It's not like I cheated on you." I let the silence hang between us, because in a way she had, not in the obvious sense, not in a way that could be neatly labeled or condemned, but she had betrayed me nonetheless, with every dismissive word, every condescending laugh, every moment she made me feel like nothing more than an afterthought. She had chipped away at our marriage with her contempt until there was nothing left to salvage. Her hands curled into fists on the table. "You're really going through with this?" she demanded. I held my ground. "I am." A flicker of something crossed her face, pride battling against something deeper, something raw, fear, maybe, the recognition that she had gone too far, that the man who had once done everything for her was finally walking away. She could plead, she could promise, but it wouldn't change a thing. Reaching for my bag, I took one last look around. There was nothing left here for me, nothing worth holding on to. "Good luck," I said, glancing at the mess she would now have to deal with alone. "Hope you enjoy taking care of everything yourself." And with that, I walked out the door, knowing, this time, I wasn't coming back. This story has come to an end. Life teaches us that love and respect are not just words, but actions shown in everyday life. When one partner becomes merely a convenience for the other, the balance breaks, and the relationship turns into a one-sided effort. The protagonist of this story realized that his care was not seen as an act of love, but as an expectation. But love is not about self-sacrifice. It is about mutual support and appreciation. The lesson is simple. Value those who invest their hearts in you, and do not be afraid to walk away if you are not respected. True happiness begins with self-respect. What's your opinion? Please tell me which city and country you watch this video from, and I'll say goodbye to you until the next video. Goodbye.